Hello, welcome to the Tales from the Dark Corridor. Make sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to put into the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories. I chose the Cabinet Mountains because people forget about them. They talk about Glacier, the Bob Marshall, Yellowstone, places with names that carry weight, places people romanticize. The cabinets sit there quietly in the northwest corner of Montana, all jagged ridgelines and black timber, absorbing storms and secrets without advertising either. Locals don't brag about them. They don't post photos. They don't linger once the snow starts coming in earnest. That should have been my first warning. I started my hike in late October, the kind of time when winter hasn't fully arrived but fall has already given up. The trailhead was empty. No tire tracks, no footprints. The sky was a dull, metallic gray, and the air smelled like coming snow. I signed the register, habit more than expectation, and noticed the last entry was dated nearly 2 weeks earlier. A solo hunter. No checkout note. I didn't think much of it. The plan was 4 nights solo, light but prepared. I'd packed for cold, carried extra calories, emergency beacon, bear spray. I wasn't reckless. I'd spent years in wilderness areas tougher than this. The cabinets just felt heavier. The forest swallowed sound in a way I wasn't used to. Even my own footsteps seemed muted after a few hours, like the ground didn't want to echo them. The first day went smoothly enough. Steep climbs, narrow valleys, dense stands of fir and larch. Snow began to fall late afternoon, soft, lazy flakes that barely accumulated. I set camp near a small alpine creek, filtered water, ate a solid dinner. Everything was normal. That night, though, I woke up hungry, not snack hungry, not burned a lot of calories hungry. This was sharp and insistent, like something clawing inside my gut. I checked my watch just after midnight and tried to ignore it. I'd eaten enough. Still, my stomach twisted and cramped, like it hadn't been fed in days. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Just stillness, so complete it rang in my ears. I lay there listening until I heard something else fill the silence. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching lightly in the snow. Too evenly spaced to be small game. Too quiet to be something careless. They circled my camp, staying just beyond the glow of my headlamp. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My hand hovered near my bear spray while my brain scrambled for explanations. Elk, moose, maybe a curious wolf. Then whatever it was stopped, right outside the light. I heard it inhale. It sounded wrong. Wet. Like air being pulled through something that shouldn't still be breathing. The inhale lasted too long, followed by a soft clicking noise, almost like joints shifting. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came gray and heavy. Snow had accumulated a few inches overnight, enough to show tracks. I stepped out of my shelter carefully and scanned the area. There were no tracks leading in, no tracks leading out, just a series of deep impressions in the snow, narrow and elongated, as if something had stood there for a long time, weight pressed straight down watching. The snow inside them was darker, slightly melted, like heat had radiated from whatever made them. I packed fast. The hunger returned within an hour of hiking, worse than before. I stopped, forced down a granola bar, drank water. It helped for maybe 10 minutes before the hollow ache came roaring back. My thoughts started drifting to food that wasn't in my pack. Meat, fat, warmth. The ideas felt intrusive, unwanted, but they lingered. Not visually at first. The trees were still trees. The trail was still roughly where it should be. But the spacing tightened. The light dimmed. The air felt thick, heavy in my lungs. My GPS lost signal completely, spinning uselessly as I moved. When I checked my map, landmarks didn't line up the way they should have. Then I heard my name. It came from uphill, carried easily through the trees. My own voice calling out like I'd lost someone and needed help. Every instinct screamed at me to answer. I opened my mouth before I realized what I was doing and clamped it shut hard enough to bite my tongue. I knew better. Everyone does, even if they pretend not to. You don't answer voices in the woods. You don't follow something you can't see, especially when you're alone. The voice laughed. It wasn't loud, just a broken sound, like someone testing out the idea of laughter without understanding it. I turned and started moving downhill, fast. The trail disintegrated into deadfall and snow-covered rock. My breathing grew ragged, lungs burning in the cold air. I kept expecting to hear something crashing behind me. I didn't. That terrified me more than pursuit would have. That night I camped without a fire, wedged between boulders where the wind cut less sharply. I rationed my food even though the hunger screamed at me. Every bite tasted wrong, flat, metallic, like chewing on paper soaked in blood. Sleep came in fragments, torn apart by dreams of endless walking through snow, my boots gone, feet numb, pain fading into something dangerously close to comfort. I woke to the smell of rot. It seeped into my shelter, thick and nauseating. Old blood, wet fur, decay layered over cold air. Branches snapped nearby. Heavy footsteps approached, this time unconcerned with stealth. I could hear its joints moving, bones grinding softly under stretched skin. It spoke again. This time, it used my father's voice. He'd died years ago. The thing mimicked the sound well enough to make my chest ache, but it didn't understand cadence, emotion. The words came too evenly, too eager. It kept saying my name, over and over, closer each time, until tears ran down my face and I bit my hand until blood filled my mouth just to keep from responding. When it stepped into the moonlight, I saw enough to know the stories hadn't exaggerated. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs were pulled long and thin, joints bending at angles that made my eyes slide away in instinctive refusal. Skin clung to its frame in gray, splitting patches, stretched so tight it tore to reveal dark muscle beneath. Antlers rose from its skull, cracked, asymmetrical, tangled with scraps of fabric and old bone. Its eyes reflected the moon like a predator's. Its mouth was too wide, too full of teeth. It crouched just outside my shelter, smiling, lips peeling back farther than skin should allow. "You're almost ready," it whispered. I don't remember deciding to run. I remember movement, terror, the sudden, overwhelming clarity that staying meant death. Not quick, not merciful, but something slow and consuming. I tore through the forest, crashing through brush, slipping on snow-slick rock. My mind fractured between survival and a horrifying temptation to stop, to let the cold take me, to let the hunger end. That thought scared me more than the thing behind me. The terrain dropped sharply. I slipped on ice and slammed into a frozen creek bed, pain exploding up my leg as something tore. I screamed. Behind me, the creature screamed back, not in anger, but frustration, like a hunter denied its kill. The scream carried. Others answered, distant, hollow, too many. I crawled, then dragged myself, then staggered upright and kept moving until dawn bled into the sky. I don't remember reaching the trailhead. I don't remember finding my truck. Search and rescue found me hours later, curled against the door, half frozen, chewing on a protein bar with bloody fingers, like I thought it might vanish if I stopped. They asked what happened. I said I got lost. They didn't push. One of them, a local, met my eyes and gave a slow, understanding nod, like he'd heard the story before, like he didn't need details. I don't go back to the Cabinet Mountains anymore, but sometimes when winter settles in and I miss meals without meaning to, when hunger sharpens too quickly and the cold feels comforting instead of dangerous, I catch myself staring into tree lines a little too long. And every now and then, I swear I hear my name, spoken perfectly now, from somewhere deep in the snow-choked timber.
The winter the mountain kept me. I broke my ankle 8 miles into the Montana backcountry, far beyond where anyone would hear me scream. The trail had been quiet all day, too quiet. Fresh snow muffled my steps, and the sky had that dull, pewter look that locals warn you about. I told myself I'd turn around after the ridge. I always did that. Just 1 more mile. Just 1 more view. I never saw the ice. My foot slid sideways, my body twisted, and the sound that came from my leg didn't belong in nature. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping under too much weight. I hit the ground hard, breath exploding out of me in a white cloud. Pain followed a second later, hot, immediate, and final. I knew right away I wasn't walking out. The snow started falling harder almost immediately, thick flakes turning the world into a white tunnel. I tried my radio. Nothing. My phone flashed no service and died moments later. I dragged myself off the trail, crying, swearing, bargaining with a sky that didn't care. That was when the forest changed. The wind stopped. The birds vanished. Even the snow seemed to fall more softly, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. I smelled something, wet fur, pine sap, cold stone. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow, heavy, purposeful, not crashing blindly through brush like a bear, but pacing, circling me. I swung my headlamp wildly, panic tearing at my chest until the beam caught something standing between the trees. It stood upright, broad shoulders dusted with snow, long arms hanging low, eyes reflecting gold, not red, not animal, aware. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it looked old, ancient, like it had been waiting there long before I ever existed. I screamed again. It didn't flinch. The last thing I remember before blacking out was being lifted, carefully, cradled against something warm as the storm finally broke loose above us. When I woke, I thought I was dead. The cave smelled of smoke and stone. Firelight danced along the walls, throwing shadows that stretched and shrank with every flicker. My leg was elevated, wrapped, splinted with branches tied so precisely it looked intentional. Someone, something, had gone to great lengths to keep me alive. It sat across the fire from me. The Sasquatch was massive, even seated, its back brushing the cave wall. Its breathing was slow and steady, each exhale fogging the air. It didn't stare. It didn't loom. It simply existed in the same space. Like a presence the cave had always known. Outside, the storm screamed. The blizzard lasted days, then more days. Snow buried the mountains in layers so deep I couldn't see the entrance anymore. The world shrank to firelight, shadows, and the rhythm of survival. It fed me without words. Roots softened in the fire, strips of dried meat, water melted from ice. When my ankle swelled and turned angry purple, it packed snow and crushed leaves around it, humming softly as it worked. The sound vibrated through the cave, low and steady, easing the pain in a way nothing else could. I learned its routines. It left before dawn and returned before dark, always carrying something: wood, food, fresh hides. When the temperature dropped dangerously low, it built the fire higher and moved closer to me, blocking drafts with its body. I was never afraid after the first week. I felt lonely and broken often, but not afraid. Winter tightened its grip. Weeks passed, then months. My ankle healed crooked but strong enough to stand. I relearned how to walk on stone, how to balance, how to move slowly without wasting energy. The Sasquatch watched, approving, like a patient teacher. Sometimes, in the long nights, other sounds echoed through the mountains, howls that didn't belong to wolves, distant knocks answering one another across ridgelines. Each time, the Sasquatch positioned itself between me and the cave mouth, muscles tense, eyes sharp. Only then did I understand. It wasn't hiding from humans. It was protecting me from something else. I didn't understand fear anymore. Not the way I used to. The cave was safe. The fire was warm. The Sasquatch had never let anything cross the threshold. But one night, deep into winter, I felt it return in a way that froze my blood. The Sasquatch woke before I did. Its body went rigid, every muscle tightening as it stared toward the cave mouth. The fire crackled softly, unaware, but the air had changed, thick, sour, carrying a smell like wet fur and rot. Not pine, not stone. Something wrong. Then I heard it. Footsteps, but uneven. Too light for something so large. Nails scraping rock. A low rattling breath that didn't belong to anything natural. The Sasquatch let out a warning sound I'd never heard before, a deep rolling growl that vibrated through the cave walls and into my bones. The answering sound came from outside. A howl, broken and distorted, half canine, half human. It echoed through the mountain like laughter dragged through a throat full of teeth. The Sasquatch moved instantly. It shoved more wood onto the fire, flames roaring higher, then positioned itself between me and the entrance. Its posture changed completely. Not gentle, not careful. This was something older, territorial, violent. It picked up a thick branch hardened in the fire, gripping it like a weapon. A shadow crossed the cave mouth. I saw it only for a moment, silhouetted against blowing snow. A tall, hunched shape with elongated limbs, ears sharp against its skull, eyes glowing pale and hungry. It paced just beyond the light, sniffing, clicking its teeth together as if tasting the air. The Sasquatch roared. The sound wasn't anger, it was command. What followed happened fast. The dogman lunged into the light, jaws snapping, moving on all fours and then suddenly upright, claws scraping sparks from the stone. The Sasquatch met it head on, slamming into it with a force that shook the cave's ceiling. Fur and snow exploded into the air as they crashed against the rocks. I crawled back as far as I could, hands over my mouth, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. They fought like titans, raw strength against speed. The dogman darted and snapped, trying to get past, trying to get to me. The Sasquatch blocked every attempt, taking blows that would have killed anything else, roaring louder with each strike. Finally, with a thunderous crack, the Sasquatch drove the burning branch into the creature's shoulder. The smell of scorched fur filled the cave. The dogman screamed, high and wrong, and bolted into the storm, disappearing into the white with one last hateful howl. Silence followed. The Sasquatch stood there for a long time, chest heaving, listening. Only when it was certain the threat was gone did it turn back to me. It knelt, lowering itself, eyes searching my face, not for fear, but for harm. I realized then something terrifying and comforting all at once. The mountain wasn't empty, and the Sasquatch hadn't saved me once. It had been protecting me all winter. Spring came suddenly, as it always does in the mountains. Snowmelt trickled through the cave walls. The air changed. One morning, the Sasquatch cleared the entrance completely and stood aside, leaving a path open. Down the mountain lay the trail, civilization, noise. It looked back at me once, just once. No sadness, no regret. Just the quiet certainty of something that had done what it was meant to do. I limped away. They found me 3 days later, hypothermic, malnourished, alive. The doctors called it a miracle. The search and rescue team asked how I survived the winter. I told them I found shelter. I didn't tell them about the firelight, the humming, or the massive shadow that stood guard while the mountain tried to kill me. But every winter now, when storms roll in heavy and the forest falls silent, I think about that cave, and I know, without doubt, that if the mountain ever decides to keep me again, I won't be alone.
The one that carried me. I didn't plan to be out that late. The hike was supposed to take 4 hours, 5 at most. I'd done it before. Same trail, same mountains. I even remember checking my watch when I passed the halfway marker and thinking I had plenty of daylight left. That was before the fall. The shale gave way under my boot without warning. 1 second I was stepping down, the next I was tumbling, rolling hard until my legs slammed against a boulder with a sound I'll never forget. a sharp crack too solid to be just pain. I screamed before I could stop myself. The pain came fast and blinding, like fire rushing up my leg. When I tried to move, my ankle bent in a way ankles aren't supposed to bend. That's when panic hit. No service, no trail traffic. Night coming fast. I remember sitting there breathing hard, telling myself not to panic. People survive worse. People get rescued. But the shadows were already stretching between the trees and the temperature was dropping. Then the forest went quiet. Not gradually, instantly. No insects, no birds, no wind in the leaves. It felt like the world was holding its breath. At first I thought the sound I heard was my heartbeat, but then I realized it was footsteps, heavy ones, slow, purposeful, not crashing through the brush like in something moving around it. I gripped the rock beside me and listened. The steps stopped. I told myself it was a bear. That made sense. But bears don't walk that far on two legs. The shape that stepped into the clearing was taller than anything I'd ever seen in the woods. Broad shoulders, long arms hanging nearly to its knees, covered in dark, matted hair that caught the last light of the day. I couldn't believe it. Bigfoot is real. Every story I'd ever heard slammed into my mind at once. The fear should have made me scream, but I couldn't make a sound. It looked at my leg. I know how that sounds, but it's true. Its head tilted slightly, eyes focused on the twisted mess below my knee. It made a low sound, not a growl, not a roar, something softer, almost concerned. Then it knelt next to me. The ground actually compressed under its weight. I felt it through the rock. It reached out slowly, giving me time to panic, to flinch, to pull back. But I couldn't move. Its hand was massive with thick fingers. And yet, when it touched my leg, it was gentle. It adjusted the bone, just enough to stop the bleeding. I blacked out for a second, woke up gasping. When my vision cleared, it was tearing strips of bark and wrapping them tight, using moss to cushion the break. Like it had done this before. Night fell completely while it worked. When it finished, it looked at me again, then toward the dark forest uphill. It made a huff, and then slid one arm under my shoulders and the other under my knees, and lifted me. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt safe. Its body was warm, radiating heat through the cold night air. Its grip was firm but careful, adjusting whenever I winced. The world swayed as it carried me through the trees, stepping over roots and rocks without slowing. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time I woke, the forest looked different. Stars became visible through the canopy. Then I saw headlamps swaying back and forth in the distance. I heard people calling my name. I tried to speak. My throat barely worked, but I managed a sound. The Bigfoot stopped immediately. It lowered me to the ground, carefully, laying me on my back on the trail. I recognized it instantly. Familiar terrain and reflective markers on the trees. The voices came closer. The creature stepped back toward the trees. Just before disappearing, it looked at me one last time, as if it was relieved. Rescuers found moments later. They asked how I got there, how I survived the night, why my splint looked odd. I told them I didn't know. When I think about that night, I realize something that keeps me awake. That creature didn't just save me. It knew exactly where to leave me. I'm thankful to be alive, but I can't talk about it to anyone. All I can do is post this anonymous video to ease my mind. I had always prided myself on being a confident hiker. Solo backpacking trips were my escape from the rest of the world. They provided a way to clear my head and prove to myself I still had control over something. That confidence shattered when I crossed into unfamiliar trail country, chasing a shortcut I never should have taken. I was hiking in the Great Bear Wilderness of northwestern Montana, and by the time I realized I'd wandered off the marked path, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. My water was low, my legs were shaking from exhaustion, and my phone showed no service. Every direction looked identical. Towering lodgepole pines, the same rocky soil, the same suffocating silence. I forgot my GPS emergency beacon. I was grossly unprepared. I told myself to stay calm. That panic was the real predator out here. But then the forest went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, an ominous quiet. The birds stopped calling. The wind died. The only sound was my own heartbeat thumping against my ribs. That's when I heard the first howl. It rose somewhere in the valley beneath me, low at first, then rising into a furious bellow that vibrated the air. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, maybe even a mountain lion, but the sound was too deep, too loud, too, dare I say, human. Before I could move, another howl answered it from somewhere behind me, much closer than the first had been. I froze. Then I shut off my headlamp so nothing could spot the glow and crouched against an old cedar trunk. The moon's pale light filtered through the branches, turning the forest into a black and silver labyrinth. And then I saw movement. Something huge passed between the trees about 30 yards away, each footstep crushing the forest floor in a heavy, rhythmic cadence. I held my breath as the thing walked into a sliver of moonlight that shone through the trees. It was at least 8 feet tall and covered in coarse black hair that shimmered in the moonlight. Muscles rolled beneath its fur with every step. Its arms dangled well past its waist, hands tipped with thick, curved claws. It stopped and sniffed the air. I realized it was looking for me. I crouched down and tried to crawl away quietly, but, call it dumb luck or Murphy's Law, I stepped on a twig. The snap sounded like a gunshot. It echoed through the woods. The creature's head whipped around, its glowing yellow eyes locked on mine. I was astonished by the intelligence behind them. All bets were off. I scrambled to my feet, bolting into the darkness. It followed with crashing footsteps. I gasped for air. Every breath burned my lungs. I didn't dare look back. Then another crash sounded from the right side of the trail. I nearly screamed when a second massive shape stepped into my path. It stood, bathed in moonlight, staring at me with deep brown eyes. Its fur was reddish, thick, and tangled. It felt like time stood still. Then the dark Sasquatch burst from the shadows behind me, roaring so loud my insides vibrated. The brown giant barreled forward and slammed into the black one with enough force I fell to the ground. I landed hard, spraining my ankle. I rolled into a gulch onto a pile of wet leaves. The battle raged above me. The two Sasquatch fought with fists and gnashing teeth, their roars echoing through the valley. The surrounding trees shook with every blow. I crawled back up the slope far enough to see the carnage. The black Sasquatch grabbed the other by the throat, lifting him into the air. The brown one gagged, clawing against the grasp, its tongue flailing wildly. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but before it escaped my lips, the brown Sasquatch drove a clawed foot into the other's stomach and broke loose. The fight became a blur of fists, claws, and teeth, fueled by rage and straining muscles. The black one began lunging toward me, as if furious that I still lived. That detail chilled me to the bone. The brown Sasquatch grabbed its adversary by the head, slamming it into a tree so hard the trunk split. The black creature shook off the impact, roared and charged again. The brown Sasquatch tackled the black Sasquatch to the ground. They rolled downhill, crashing through brush, smashing into rocks, sending debris flying. Then suddenly the black Sasquatch stumbled. The brown one raised his arms high and slammed both fists down onto its back, driving it to its knees. The black Sasquatch groaned, deep and guttural, and then fled, crashing into the woods, screaming in pain, fury, and humiliation. My protector stood in silence, blood matting his fur, chest heaving. My legs were trembling so badly I couldn't stand. He turned toward me. I froze, unable to decide whether to run or thank him. He approached me slowly. There was purpose in his movements, but no threat. He knelt, and his eyes met mine. He pointed north. I whispered, "You want me to go that way?" He nodded once, and I got to my feet. My whole body ached. I turned in the direction he'd pointed and took a shaky step northward. I stumbled, but he caught my arm, steadying me with surprising gentleness. His hand engulfed my entire forearm. He led me through the forest, always staying close enough to help me if I fell. He never forcing me to move faster than I could. We pressed on down the trail as the hours passed. The night grew colder. My breath came out in foggy rasps. I shuddered as a distant howl echoed from behind us. I knew it was the black Sasquatch expressing his rage at my escape. My brown giant stopped, turned toward the sound, and bellowed a deafening roar back at his foe, warning the other off. The forest went quiet again. As dawn broke, the trees thinned, and the smell of campfire smoke drifted through the air. I heard search and rescue calling my name. They were close. I turned to thank my protector, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring back into the forest, his head cocked toward the trees. He was listening to something that I couldn't hear. I reached out and touched his arm. He turned to look at me. "Why help me?" I managed to croak. He placed an enormous hand on my shoulder and shrugged with a half smile, then turned and melted into the trees as if he had never existed. I limped the last 100 yards alone and collapsed near about 25 yards from the rangers. They rushed to my side, asking how was I injured. I said I wasn't sure. It all happened so fast. Who would believe the truth? They blamed dehydration and beginning stages of hypothermia. The truth is, a guardian walks these mountains quiet, patient, and powerful. He protects lost hikers from monsters that hunt in the dark. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go deep into the woods no matter who's with me. I know what's out there, and I fear that the next time I won't be so lucky. I told myself I was prepared when I stepped off the trailhead and into the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. I had a satellite communicator clipped to my pack, a .44 revolver I hoped I wouldn't need, and years of backcountry experience behind me. My name is Mike Davis, and I've hiked Montana's high country my entire adult life. That confidence would become the most dangerous thing I carried. The first day passed quietly, almost reverently. Granite peaks rose like broken teeth against a clean blue sky, snowfields clinging stubbornly to shaded bowls even in midsummer. The air was thin and cold enough to sting my lungs, but I welcomed it. I crossed creeks fed by distant glaciers and followed game trails where elk tracks pressed deep into the mud. Everything felt ancient out there, older than maps, older than names. That sense of age settled into me as the light thinned and shadows stretched long across the valleys. I made camp near a tree line just below a cirque, choosing a spot that gave me a wide view of the basin. As dusk fell, the wilderness grew unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, empty, no birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if listening. I remember standing there with my stove half lit, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. How small. I shook it off and blamed altitude nerves. That was my first mistake. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was wind pushing branches, but there was weight to it, slow, deliberate pressure against the ground. The steps circled my campsite, staying just beyond the firelight's reach. I froze inside my sleeping bag, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. I whispered out, "Hey," my voice thin and useless. The footsteps stopped. Something exhaled, not a breath like an animal's snort or a bear's huff, but long and controlled, as if whatever was out there knew exactly how loud it wanted to be. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came pale and sickly, the sky smeared with low gray cloud. I found prints around my camp, deep impressions sunk into the soil near the tree line. They were wrong, too long, too wide. 5 toes spread unnaturally far apart, pressed into the mud like someone had walked barefoot with 100 extra pounds on their back. I stood there staring, trying to rationalize it. Deformed bear? Some kind of prank? But no bear walks heel to toe. No human leaves impressions like that. I broke camp early and pushed deeper into the wilderness, telling myself movement was safety. The trail narrowed into nothing more than a suggestion through deadfall and scree. By noon, the feeling of being watched returned. Not imagined, not paranoia. It was the kind of certainty that settles in your gut without explanation. I would stop, and a second later, something would stop too. Far off, hidden, but responding to me. The first vocalization came in the afternoon. It rolled through the basin like thunder trapped inside a throat. Low, powerful, layered with something almost human. The sound vibrated through my chest and made my vision blur. Birds erupted from the trees in a panicked cloud. I dropped to one knee, revolver halfway out of its holster, knowing instinctively how useless it would be. Whatever made that sound wasn't warning me off. It was announcing itself. I started running. That was when it began to follow openly. Branches snapped behind me, heavy and wet, as if entire limbs were being shoved aside without care. I caught glimpses between the trees, dark movement far taller than any man, moving with terrifying efficiency, not charging, herding. Every time I veered downhill or toward open ground, the movement shifted to cut me off. It knew the terrain better than I did. It knew me. By the time I reached a narrow ravine carved by snowmelt, my legs were shaking uncontrollably. I slipped more than once, skinning my palms on rock. The smell hit me then, wet fur, old rot, and something metallic beneath it, like blood soaked into leather. I heard it breathe again, closer now, the sound deep and measured, patient. I didn't see it clearly until I reached the ravine's dead end. It stood on the opposite slope, partially obscured by mist rising from the creek. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, broad shoulders matted with dark hair, clotted with mud and debris. Its arms were too long, hands hanging past its knees, fingers flexing slowly as if testing the air. Its face, God help me, was wrong. Flat and heavy-browed, eyes set too close together, reflecting no light. When it looked at me, I felt something press against my thoughts, not words but intent. It wasn't curious. It wasn't angry. It was deciding. I fired once. The shot cracked the air and echoed uselessly off the stone walls. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its head and made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. A broken mimicry of my own voice calling out earlier, twisted and dragged through a throat that had never been meant to speak. That was when I ran again, scrambling up the ravine wall, tearing my pack open on jagged rock. My satellite communicator bounced free and skidded down the slope. I almost left it. Almost. Something slammed into the rock below me, shaking the ground so hard I lost my grip and slid 10 feet, slamming into a ledge. Pain flared white-hot through my ribs. I grabbed the communicator and triggered the SOS with shaking fingers. The thing roared then, not from rage but frustration. It lunged, and for a moment I thought it would reach me. Instead, it stopped just short of the ledge, staring up at me with those dark, depthless eyes. Its lips pulled back, not into a snarl, but into something that might have been a smile. It waited. Hours passed. Cold rain began to fall, soaking me through. I huddled on that ledge, barely daring to breathe. The creature never left. Sometimes it moved out of sight, only to reappear closer. Sometimes it threw rocks, not to hit me, but to remind me it could. At one point, it reached down into the creek and lifted a boulder the size of a cooler, rolling it in its hands like a toy before letting it crash into the water below. Night fell again, and with it came the cold. I started hallucinating from pain and exposure. I thought I heard voices, rescue crews, my brother. My own thoughts turned against me. Through it all, the presence remained, constant, pressing, as if it knew help was coming and wanted me to understand how close I had come to disappearing forever. The helicopter arrived just before dawn. The sound of the rotors shattered the silence, echoing wildly through the ravine. The creature reacted instantly, stepping back into the trees with surprising speed. Before it vanished completely, it looked at me one last time. Not with anger, with recognition, as if memorizing me. Hands grabbed me from the air as the hoist lowered. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. I remember clinging to the rescuer like a child, sobbing into his shoulder as we lifted away from the ledge. Below us, the forest swallowed everything. No sign, no tracks visible from above, just endless green and stone. They told me later that weather closed in minutes after extraction, that if the helicopter had been delayed even half an hour, they wouldn't have been able to reach me. They asked about bears, about injuries, about dehydration. I answered none of it. I just stared out the window at the receding peaks, waiting to see movement that never came. I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up convinced I hear footsteps circling my house. Slow, heavy, patient. And I know, deep in the part of me that still belongs to that wilderness, that whatever watched me from the trees didn't lose interest. It let me go, and I don't know why that frightens me more. I tried to convince myself that what happened in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness was over the moment the helicopter carried me out. That belief lasted exactly 3 days. I was discharged from the hospital in Billings with cracked ribs, hypothermia scars, and a diagnosis that hovered uncomfortably between acute stress reaction and you should probably talk to someone. I didn't. I drove home instead, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, flinching at every dark stand of trees along the highway. The doctors told me trauma likes to echo. I didn't need them to explain it. I could feel the echo already, vibrating beneath my thoughts like something pacing behind thin walls. The first night back in my house, I slept with every light on. The second night, I woke at 2:11 a.m. to the sound of wood knocking against wood. It was slow, intentional. 3 hollow thumps spaced evenly apart. I lay in bed, heart hammering, staring at the ceiling while my brain did everything it could to rationalize the noise. Wind, a loose branch, someone's fence down the road. Then it came again, closer this time. Not against the house, against the tree line behind it, the same measured rhythm I'd heard circling my tent. I didn't look out the window. Morning brought no relief. I found footprints in the soft dirt near the back fence, partially obscured as if whoever, or whatever, made them hadn't wanted to leave a clear trail. Too long, too deep, 5 toes. I stood there for a long time before the cold realization settled in. I wasn't being followed. I was being checked on. I took leave from work, telling my boss I needed time to recover. That was true, just not in the way he understood. I spent hours poring over satellite images, topo maps, anything that might help me make sense of what I'd encountered. The Absaroka Beartooth isn't just wilderness. It's a fractured labyrinth of dead zones, places where GPS glitches and radio signals bend unpredictably. Indigenous stories spoke of the Watchers, things that didn't belong to any one place but guarded thresholds between them. I told myself that was folklore. Then my satellite communicator arrived in the mail. It was the same one I dropped in the ravine. Same serial number, same cracked casing, no return address, no note. I threw it in the trash. By nightfall, it was back on my kitchen counter. That was when the dream started changing. At first, I relived the ravine, the ledge, the cold, the waiting. But slowly, the details shifted. In the dreams, I didn't stay put. I climbed down. I stood in front of the thing. Sometimes it reached out. Sometimes it spoke. Not in words, but impressions. Images of valleys I didn't recognize. Of stars wheeling in unfamiliar patterns. Of people walking into forests and never walking back. I woke each time with the same certainty pressing into my skull. It had let me go because I wasn't finished. I tried running. I packed my truck and drove east, then south, avoiding mountains, avoiding trees. The knocking followed me. Motel walls vibrated with it at night. Forest silhouettes appeared where none should have been. Once, on a flat stretch of highway in Nebraska, I saw a shape pacing my headlights just beyond the beam, matching my speed for miles before veering off into open farmland that couldn't possibly hide something that large. I finally broke down and contacted a search and rescue coordinator I knew from Montana. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. Enough to sound unhinged without sounding delusional. There was a long pause on the line before he spoke again, voice lower. "You weren't the first extraction from that area," he said. "Just the first who talked." That was how I ended up back in Montana. We didn't go into the Absaroka Beartooth this time. We staged near it at a decommissioned ranger outpost slated for demolition. 4 of us total, me, the coordinator, a wildlife biologist who wouldn't meet my eyes, and a tribal liaison who carried no visible gear and asked no unnecessary questions. Night fell early beneath heavy cloud cover, the forest pressing close even where it shouldn't have been. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure returned heavier than before, like the air itself was thickening. The knocking echoed once, twice, and then stopped. Something moved beyond the tree line, not hiding, not advancing, waiting. The liaison finally spoke. "It marked you," he said quietly, "not as prey, as proof." The word landed wrong. Proof of what? The answer came when the forest opened. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It stepped into the clearing with the inevitability of a tide, massive and deliberate, its dark eyes reflecting the lantern light without warmth. Behind it, the trees bent inward, shadows stretching unnaturally long, forming shapes that made my vision ache. I realized with sudden clarity that the creature wasn't alone. It never had been. This wasn't an animal. It was a boundary. The biologist ran first. He didn't make it 10 steps before the darkness behind the thing surged forward, swallowing him without sound. No struggle, no scream, just absence. The coordinator froze, mouth open in a silent plea that never formed. I don't remember drawing my revolver. I remember the liaison placing a hand on my arm instead. "Not like this," he said. The creature turned its head toward me. Recognition flared again. Not hostility, not mercy. Expectation. Images flooded my mind. The ravine, the helicopter, the road east, the knocking at my fence. I understood then. It hadn't followed me out of the wilderness. I had brought the wilderness with me. The liaison stepped forward and began to chant, low and rhythmic, the words folding into the night like smoke. The forest groaned in response. The creature hesitated, its outline wavering, shadows pulling at it from behind. For the first time, I sensed resistance, something pushing back from the other side. The creature looked at me one last time. This time, I understood the message clearly. Survivors are witnesses. Then it stepped backward into the trees and the forest seals shut behind it like a wound closing. We left at dawn. No one spoke of the missing biologist. There would be paperwork. There always was. I was told to go home, to forget. The liaison lingered long enough to meet my eyes. "It won't come again," he said. "Not for you." I wanted to believe him. Months have passed. The knocking has stopped. The dreams have faded. I live far from the mountains now, surrounded by concrete and noise and light. People think that's safety. They're wrong, because sometimes when the city goes quiet in the hours before dawn, I feel that pressure again. Not close, not immediate, but present. Watching, waiting. And I know that somewhere, deep in the wilderness where maps lose their meaning, something remembers me. Not as prey, as evidence.